1. Firstly, just some background information. I live in a relatively small town in the country. When I was younger, around 13 or 14, I used to be obsessed with anything secret related. I would spend hours looking up conspiracy theories, watching documentaries about foreign affairs, reading articles about secret wars. I would tell everything I learned to my friends and family, but all I would really get is a, "That's nice," or "I doubt that ever happened," from them. No one seemed to be interested except for one friend of mine named Craig. We would hang out every now and then, and all we would talk about is conspiracies. Occasionally, we would have a sleepover, and instead of playing video games or watching movies, we would get out our laptops and do as much research as we could, writing down websites we deemed creepy and writing in notebooks filled with information we had gathered. It was quite exciting for both of us. We felt like we knew things we weren't meant to know, and that gave us a rush. So one night Craig was over at mine for a sleepover, and we're doing our usual secret work, and I came across this website deep within Google, on something like page 79 in the search engine. It had a list of Russian statesmen and politicians from a former branch of the Russian space program. I knew that because I recognized the Interkosmos symbol on the top left-hand corner of the page. The page was all in Russian, and I just randomly started clicking around. I eventually got to a page that looked like contact information. It had what looked like an email address at the bottom, so dumb, naive me thought it would be a good idea to send them an email using my own personal email address. At the time, my email was just my full name. I wrote an email consisting of something along the lines of, "Hello, my name is The Aflair, and I was just wondering if you would be willing to answer some questions I have about your space program." I then proceeded to list conspiracy theories about the Russian space program and demanding an answer from them. Me and Craig thought this was very clever, as we were hoping to at least get a response. In our heads, if they denied what we asked them, then they were just covering up the evidence, and therefore we had real proof. To our surprise, the email actually sent. We thought it would have been unable to send due to how old we thought the email address was. Weeks pass and we eventually forget about the email. We just go along with our daily lives of going to school and doing dumb young teenage stuff. One weekend, I was sitting at the dinner table with my family, and my sister started asking my father if he had any Russian friends. My father said no, but he had worked in Russia for a few years in the past. My sister goes on to say that her friend's mother was stopped in the street while walking home from work by two men with Russian accents in a dark green car. They asked if she knew where they could find my family's house. My dad said that was weird and he would call my sister's friend's mom later. I immediately thought back to that email I had sent. My young head started spinning with ideas of spies trying to get to me and my family. I thought it was rather exciting. After dinner, my father called my sister's friend's mom, and I listened in from upstairs. I couldn't really hear much of my father's end of the conversation, but as soon as my father hung up, he called the family down to have a talk. He told us what my sister said was true, and he was worried that maybe some thieves were trying to scope the house out. He told us to keep a lookout for a big dark green car with dark windows. If we saw something suspicious, we were to immediately find him and tell him. It was at this point I thought about telling my dad about the email, but I thought I would get in trouble, so I decided against it. The next day I was asked by my mother to take the trash out to the front to be collected tomorrow. We lived at the bottom of a long path in the countryside, so it takes about 5 minutes to walk up to the top of the driveway. As I was near the top of the path, I noticed a car parked just off the side of our driveway entrance, about 50 feet away. When I got closer, I realized it was the same car that my father had described to me. A dark green car with blacked-out windows just sitting there. I pretended not to notice it and just dumped the trash. I turned around and got out my phone to call my dad's mobile. He picked up and I told him that the car he had described was at the top of the driveway. He told me to come back to the house and he would be straight out. I slowly started to walk back home, keeping the car in my peripheral vision. Not a minute later, my dad was jogging up the drive and asked me where the car was. I turned around and pointed at it. He began to run up the drive towards the car. Suddenly, the car's engines turned on and it peeled away at speed down the road. Stunned by what just happened, me and my dad just looked at each other. We both ran back home. He told me to please not tell my mother or sister as it may scare them. When we got back home, he took me into his home office. There he called the police. The police said there was not much they could do as they hadn't done anything illegal. but to call back if they kept showing up. Well, they did show up again. Every time it was me or my dad that would notice, and the same routine would happen. One of us would see the car, try to get close or flag it down, it would speed off, call the police, then repeat. My mother even saw it once when coming home from shopping. The police eventually sent a car to patrol our area, but they never saw the dark green car. My dad was getting noticeably paranoid and even considered buying a rifle. This whole time I genuinely thought it was my fault, and if I had never sent that email then none of this would happen. But I just didn't want to get in trouble. Once I got actually quite close to the car, as it stalled while trying to drive off. I tried to read the license plate, but the car was side-on to me. By the time I got any closer, it was too far down the road. At that point, I wasn't scared anymore, just angry, and I wanted the people in that car to just leave us alone. The worst part for me happened when I was home alone. Both my mother and father were at work, and my sister was at one of her after-school programs. My dad told me to keep the door locked at all times, and if anything were to happen, to call the police. I was watching TV in the living room when I heard the gravel in our driveway move. This was the distinctive sound of a car coming down the driveway. I got up to see which one of my parents was home from work, but it wasn't either of them. The dark green car was now in the driveway. I felt so helpless and scared. It just stayed parked there, engine still running. I jumped up to grab the home phone, but as soon as I got up, the car turned around and drove out. I immediately called my dad. He told me he would be home soon, and just to keep the door locked. When he got home, I told him what happened. He didn't see the car when driving back, but again he called the police. This continued for at least 2 weeks. Every day we felt more and more like we were being watched, even hunted. We would see that car at all hours of the day, even noticing them around midnight, just sitting there at the top of our drive. However, one day they didn't turn up, and then finally the car just stopped showing up altogether. We never saw it again, or the people who drove it, but it left the family scared for a good few months. After this experience, I stopped my research. Me and Craig drifted apart, and I got into what I deemed safer hobbies. I cannot be sure what started these events, and I don't know if it had anything to do with my email. It may have been a coincidence in timing. It did, however, feel sinister in nature, and that fear has stuck. That knowing you are being watched and not feeling safe in your own home has lasted with me for some time. I know this sounds untrue, but I swear that it is, and I cannot stress that enough. Thank you for taking the time to listen. If anyone has had any experiences similar to mine, please let me know. 2. This happened to me about 2 years ago when I was 18, I'm female by the way, and was in my second week of college. Our school had off-campus buildings where classes were often held, so small buses packed with students and professors going back and forth was common. The ride to those buildings was about an hour long. The buses were set up, not like a school bus with the seats in pairs, but with the seats going around the interior of the bus, facing inwards, if that makes any sense. Anyway, I was sitting on the bus ready to head back to the main campus from my class. A man about mid to late 30s wearing a suit entered the bus shortly after me, and asked me where it was going. I told him. He nodded and sat down next to me since it was one of the few seats left. Since the trip was an hour long, pretty much everyone fell asleep, and it was normal, because of the bus setup, that people fell asleep and often woke up to people accidentally leaning on them. Well, I fell asleep and I woke up about 40 minutes into the ride, and noticed that the man who sat down next to me was holding my hand. He was asleep too, and I laughed to myself thinking that in his sleep he accidentally held on to me. To avoid making him feel embarrassed or feel awkward, I slithered my hand out of his as carefully as possible to try not to wake him. But as I did, huge red flag, his grip on me tightened. Like real tight, it hurt a bit. He was still sleeping, and we were about 15 to 20 minutes away from our destination, so me, being a big chicken and scared out of my mind, decided to put up with it until we got back to the school. When we got back to campus, it was drizzling a bit, so I zoomed off the bus and whipped out my umbrella. But the man from the bus caught up to me and asked if he could walk under my umbrella with me. I thought this could no way be a coincidence. A bunch of other people had umbrellas too that he could have asked. But me being naive felt bad because he was wearing a suit and still chalked up what previously happened to a misunderstanding. We walked under my umbrella, and literally the first thing he asked me was my age. I told him, and he began to tell me that he was getting his master's in some kind of math field that sounded complicated, and I don't remember at all what it was. He then asked me for my number, but I politely declined and told him that I don't give my number to strangers. Get this. He then tells me, "I don't want your number to call or chat with you, I just want friendship, that's all, friendship." Big nope from me. If you don't want my number for chatting with me, then what's the point? I was super weirded out, and by this time we approached a large bridge that's at the school. A few really skinny stray dogs were on it, and the guy then pulls me into a hug with him and starts shrieking. I shove him and he apologizes, saying he is scared of dogs. At this point I'm even more terrified and just really want him gone. But as we're about to part ways, he tells me that his phone isn't working and that he has an emergency call he needs to make. Me, being super stupid, hands him mine and he proceeds to call himself. His phone starts ringing in his pocket. He looks at me with a chilling grin and says, "Hey, now I got your number." I ended up filing a police report, and the super understanding officer helped me big time and banned him from taking the buses, as well as placed a no-contact order between us. I thought maybe I was overreacting during this process, but after the detective read me the other guy's statement, I knew I did the right thing. He confirmed my story and said everything I claimed was true. He also said something along the lines of, "Yes, I was aware that I was holding her while we were sleeping. I had no idea she didn't want me to do that since she never said anything." Well, I was asleep, dude, how would I? In my country where I'm from, India, it is normal to marry younger girls, so I didn't think there was a problem. Buddy, just know. Maybe he was just confused about customs or something, but I feel better talking about this, and I hope I don't offend anyone. Thank you. 3. When I was growing up, we lived in Baltimore City until I turned 12. This incident happened, I believe, when I was around 7 or 8. I don't remember exactly, but I know it was definitely before I turned 9, because my older brother left for boot camp and then later deployed when I was 9. Both my brother and mother were and are in the military, and he was still at home and not yet in the military when this happened. Also, I am mute. I was born with deformed vocal cords, which isn't super important, but it does affect the story somewhat. Our house was only 6 blocks from my school, and I would walk home by myself on some days. Sometimes my brother would meet me at my school and walk me home, but he played football and baseball, and sometimes would be at his school for practice. My mother worked 12-hour shifts as a nurse, so some days she would pick me up, others she wouldn't. Of course, she wasn't too keen on me walking home, but me being a stupid and naive kid, nagged her enough to where she finally let me walk home on those days instead of taking the bus. It was only 6 blocks, and again, being a kid, it made me feel mature and responsible. I know, stupid me. My mom had always been worried about predators, like most parents are, but she worried that me being mute would make me an easier target since I can't scream. I do always carry a whistle around my neck, and the importance of stranger danger had been drilled into me by my mom. She had also had me learn self-defense since I was 4, but again, I was only 7 or 8 at the time, and I hadn't exactly mastered any of these skills. On the day of this event, I was walking home by myself. I was a very lonely kid who didn't have any friends. I'm not announcing that for pity or anything, just to help you understand why I was alone. I usually did a pretty good job of being mindful of my surroundings, but again, I was a kid and my mind would sometimes wander and daydream like any other normal kid. I was about halfway home when it happened. I was passing by a narrow alleyway, and out of nowhere, I felt myself grabbed very roughly from behind. I felt my body just freeze up in panic. One thing I remember very vividly was the odor. This guy smelled terrible, just awful BO, like nasty old gym socks that you left in the bottom of your locker and forgot about them until the end of the school year or something. I could feel his hot, horrible breath against the back of my head and neck. He was breathing heavy, like a dog does when it's hot out. He didn't say a word. I just remember his arms wrapped so tightly around me. Looking back now, I realize he must have been watching me for a while because he never tried to cover my mouth. He must have known that I was mute. Even though it was just a few seconds, it felt like time slowed. I couldn't move, like my brain just wouldn't tell my body to move or something. I remember seeing the sidewalk get further away as he pulled me back into the alley. Finally, my body woke the hell up, and I started flailing as hard as I could. I don't know if he was actually strong or if it was because of my age, but his grip felt like it was going to crush me. I kept trying to reach my hand up to grab my whistle and try to get it in my mouth, but my arms were pinned at my sides with his arms around me. I was kicking my legs as hard as I could. I felt so helpless. No matter how hard I tried, I could not break free, not even a little bit. I remember a thought flashing in my head that this was the kind of thing my mom and teachers had always warned us about. It made me even more scared. I tried kicking my heels back into him, hoping maybe I'd get lucky and nail a shin or something. No such luck. It just made him squeeze me tighter. He was squeezing so tight I could barely breathe. I guess it was a combination of being squeezed like that and the fear of what was happening. But I started feeling dizzy and faint. That was the most terrifying moment because I felt like if everything went black, that I'd never wake up again. My head was starting to droop down and I could feel myself getting very weak. From out on the street I heard a loud, "Hey, what the fuck?" And I managed to raise my eyes up and saw two figures running towards us yelling. The guy holding me immediately let me go. I had been up in the air and kinda landed on the concrete in a heap, gasping. I was shaking so hard. My backpack felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. I could hear the footsteps of two people running towards us, and the footsteps of the other guy running away down the other side of the alley. I could feel one of them tear past me. I felt the breeze as he passed, and even heard the sound of it in my ear. The other person must have not wanted to leave me there and stopped. I was still in this daze, a little dizzy, and in some kind of shock, I guess. I felt their hand touch my shoulder and ask if I was okay. This jolted me out of the daze and I just bolted. I didn't look at them or anything. I just took off out of the alleyway and sprinted to our house. I got inside, locked the door, and just collapsed into a ball in the foyer. All my emotions caught up with me then, and I just sobbed and sobbed. I laid there for what felt like forever. I was still there when my brother came in from practice. I was still very visibly upset, and he immediately wanted to know what was wrong. I explained what happened, though I'm sure it was not nearly as coherent as the way I'm telling you now, since I was still extremely shook up. He called the police immediately, and then my mom. My brother was a decently sized guy, and I'm sure he wanted to hunt the smelly guy down, but he sat on the steps with me in his lap until the police came. The police in that area don't exactly have the best response time, but they actually arrived fairly quickly. My mom got there shortly after they did, of course out of her mind with worry and anger. My brother and mom helped me relay through the police what happened. I communicate through ASL and they translated to the police for me, since I couldn't give a description. I never actually saw the guy. They said they'd be on the lookout for anyone acting suspicious, but the chances of finding him were extremely slim. However, it turns out the two guys that ran into the alleyway to help me had called the police as well, and were able to give somewhat of a description. Though apparently the guy had on a knit cap with a hood up as well, so unless he was wearing the same clothes, he would be hard to find. To be honest, I don't think the police really took it that seriously overall, since Baltimore is a pretty dangerous place, and way worse crimes happen there constantly. Gave me the whole, "be more careful from now on" speech and left. My mom and brother checked in with them pretty regularly for a while, but they never found the guy. Needless to say, my mom definitely didn't let me walk home by myself anymore. I began taking the bus which would drop me off right at our house, and my brother worked it out with his coaches that he could be home when I got home. We ended up moving to Washington State a few years later when I was 12, and I only go back to Baltimore once every year or so to visit my grandparents, though I never went back to our old neighborhood again. I hate to think what would have happened to me had those two guys not run into the alley after me. Thank you to those guys, and to the crazy, smelly guy that tried to kidnap me. Please, let's not ever meet again. Hey everybody, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to 3 True Scary Stories, episode 413. And thank you very much to everybody who allowed me to use their stories in this video. Okay, I just want to catch you guys up on the changes to the schedule. Now, We'll still have daily videos as normal, that's not changed at all. It's just the times are going up. I'm playing about with the times a bit to try and get the best, to try and basically hit the golden time is what I need to do. You know, for the best times for people getting the videos, getting the notifications, getting recommended. It's very important for trying to help a channel grow, and my channel really needs to grow because growth is tapered off quite a bit. So what we're doing is, you will have noticed they went up earlier on the weekends. So Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, just the normal time, that's 7 PM UK, and whatever it happens to be for you where you live. And then Thursday, Friday, they'll go up a bit earlier, 5 PM, again UK time, and at the weekends it'll be 2 PM. They seemed not bad at the weekend view-wise, so I certainly didn't notice anything detrimental, so that's not bad. And hopefully it helps with other things, so we'll try it for a little bit and see how it goes. Okay, and with that I'm going to head off for now, so until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourselves.